And we're back. This is the last segment, I hope. So, at the end of um, episode 4, is this it? Yeah, episode 4, we have, the illiterates. And I think um, they make a special point, and it's named the same way in the original miniseries, the illiterates. Um, it's the culmination. They're finalizing the divorce. Sex is involved. Maybe perhaps, again, one partner you can see is just like, well, this might be the last time, so let's just go out with a bang, literally. While the other partner is probably thinking that there's still hope. Because within that dynamic, also those roles switched. The person that was the originally, I want out of this marriage, now wants to save the marriage. And then the person that wanted to save the marriage no longer cares to save the marriage. And we see the same dynamic with the 2021 version. Um, but, once they get to the fisticuffs situation, you realize that this isn't bad. But in between, and perhaps the breakdown of this new contemporary version, there, I want to say, and I'm not saying that the characters from the 1973 version wasn't fully fleshed out, but we have more of a background as to more through a psychological perspective. That's why I said that it was great to see the creator of In Treatment bring perhaps the same concept of that show to this miniseries, because there's more inner workings. It's not so black and white where it's like this person's just evil, this person just. And again, in certain cases, you might not get an answer to certain things, but these characters are dissected to the point where we have a better understanding. And that we can't necessarily point fingers here. Although typically you would think that Jonathan is the victim here because, again, he is the understanding husband, doting father, professional, is there as a supportive anchor for his wife, and she didn't take that into consideration. She still stepped out of their marriage. Um, was he really the victim here? And when they have these serious moments when they're close to either making love or in fisticuffs, they reveal themselves for the trauma that they've probably brought on from from baggage of their childhood. And Jonathan, because through therapy, he's worked through some emotions and not necessarily putting all the blame on his wife, even though she is the one that cheated. He had to question himself, and be inquisitive of, okay, well, was she really to blame? Did I necessarily do something? And that's not to say that like all the responsibility weighs on him, but you also have to sometimes cop or admit to your own wrongdoings, perhaps. And that's what we see more in this miniseries as opposed to the 1973 version, where it's just like the man is just a cad and he just wants to have his cake and eat it too. And Paula, too, in the 1973 version, she wrote a letter. So we updated that for the 2021 version. There was a voicemail, voice message through some kind of app, perhaps WhatsApp or whatever, and he plays it for his wife so he can hear that Paulie, her new lover, was not interested and didn't really care to make things work with her. And the same thing applies here with Paula, with that character as his lover had enough or whatever the case may be, and she wrote a letter. so so moving forward, you see, and that could have really gone sideways because, again, I wasn't familiar with the original story, so I was like, oh, is it going to turn into like a Gone Girl kind of situation? Are they going to frame him? Is she crazy enough to like harm herself or even kill herself? Because she really could have gone off the deep end here. Just like I said in the first episode, that could have gone left real quick. So I was like, who's to say that she wouldn't have another manic episode? She lost her job. Her lover doesn't want to deal with her no more. Her kid hates her. She could have really done something, and she could have totally framed him because he punched her. Like, she had a big old welt. But no, that's not how it goes. And especially that ending, the way he kind of like, drives off. And every episode on HBO Max, soon after the show ends, in the credits, they go into like what they consider like the writer's room, and they give like a breakdown. But for that episode, there was no breakdown. So I'm kind of, maybe it was just too raw and too intimate of an episode that they didn't give the specifics, or maybe it was self-explanatory. Don't know. But moving on to the final episode, and that is in the middle of the night in a dark house somewhere in the world, which is, I think, is the actual phrase uttered by the leading protagonist, the male that leaves his wife, Johan, I think, and Marianne. They have some kind of discussion. So fast forward, in the 1973 version, another 10 years have passed by. The kids are a little bigger, and they're officially divorced. Somehow they reconcile, and you would think that they would just be great friends, because some people can stay friends because of the children, and so they have some kind of civility, but not in every case. But in this case, they've managed to figure out, perhaps, I don't know if these two are very codependent of each other or just have a really great sex life, and they miss each other's, you know what, and so they carry on an affair. Both parties here are now, have remarried, have redone their lives with other people, and now are faithful to those partners with each other. So they meet up in some random street. He picks her up, and they go to their old house, which I don't know if necessarily it had been sold or it's just been waiting to be sold. They revisit their memories. It's very awkward, and they can't stay there. So they're kind of like, no, this is just like bringing up too many bad memories. Let's stay somewhere else. He calls a friend, tells him, even though his friend knows that he's married, but he says like, oh, I met a young thing. And again, it's the timestamp of that time, because again, it's perfectly normal for an older man to hook up with a younger woman, and his friend understand and even lends his place out. It's like, yeah, the key's under the rug, and he's like, I'm calling you because you understand these things. And again, that male chauvinist kind of way of thinking still exists to this day. It's not like it ceased to exist then, but it's for audiences consuming this form of entertainment, and maybe even how society judges, it's perfectly fine. No one even blinks an eye. But when the roles are reversed and it's a woman, it's like, oh, or question. Because I don't know, again, that goes into other topics of how women are seen, especially in the United States, as being more motherly and nurturing, and wouldn't opt for a younger person. But whatever, we'll get into that kind of conversation another time. Moving forward with the 2021 version, you can see that Jonathan has had a loss. His father passes. We don't see that in the 1973 version. And you can see that now we're more invested in his background, his Judaism, and they're in the middle of a funeral proceeding. You can see like the tombstone and his mother. We see his mother. I think we see the mother in the 1973 version, but we see more of a kind of judgmental character here in the 2021 version. And they go through the whole proceedings. He's talking to his sister, and then there's a private moment with his mother, and he kind of says like, well, the silver lining is that, you regain your life. You can do whatever you want now, because the father has such control of that marriage that he wouldn't allow his wife to do certain things like drive. So now she has to go back to her single life and drive. And she really loved to drive. She makes mention of that in the car. And he's like, well, see, there's a silver lining. So now that he's gone, you can live your life the best way that you can. And she's like, don't ever do that. It is not, and it really was kind of cold and callous to say something like that. You just lost your father. But again, he had an estranged relationship with his father. That's why he even left the religion. It wasn't just solely the fact that he was in love with this woman who he marries, but because he wanted an out. It was a very restrictive, confining home life that he had as a kid. So there was already an issue there that he probably was like, well, whatever. I think he kind of took it for what it was. Um, and she's like, don't ever compare my situation with your situation. You could have done whatever you had to save your marriage. And I still loved your father regardless of how he was. So there's that. Again, every relationship is different. You can't dissect the same. But we realize that, so we see now Mira waiting for somebody. Oh, and before I even get into that, we see Paulie. We see Paulie physically. And I guess they've broken up, but they're still great friends. And she's doing like, she's working as a freelance person in tech, and he offers her a position. They seem like great friends. He sees that there's something different about her, and he kind of pieces it together. Excuse me. He's like, are you dating somebody? You look a little refreshed. What's going on? And she's like, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm co-parenting with my ex, but I'm okay and I'm single and it's fine. He doesn't believe it. And so, sure, Lil, absolutely, he hit it on the mark. And she is seeing somebody. She goes and picks up somebody from the train station, perhaps the Metro North. And she's talking to her daughter. Her daughter's a little older now, perhaps, 8, close to 10, maybe even preteen. A few years have gone by, but I can't say 10 years like in the 1973 version. I think they're closer to like 17 years of perhaps knowing each other. So, and she's talking to her daughter. Her daughter is having a sleepover, and she calls for permission to watch something that she doesn't know. The person who's babysitting her needed her mother's permission to watch perhaps PG-13 material, and she's like, well, of course, Mom, but she wanted me to ask and whatever. She's excited about a sleepover, and she's waiting, and then you can see her like don't, the person who she's picking up approaching the car, and like don't say anything until she hangs up. And then we see that it's Jonathan. So Jonathan and Mira have again made up. And at first you're like, oh, maybe they're just friends and she's doing him a service or, helping him out. Just didn't want their child to know. No, you can see that perhaps from the time being that he had lost, prior to losing his father, they had met up. And they had hooked up. And so now you see that the 2021 version matches the 1973 version, where they have come to some understanding of casual hookups as, divorcees now. And again, this happens. This isn't like anything outrageous, like, oh my God, no. Some people just, again, have a thing for each other, codependency, great sex, and and they find themselves back in the same situation, or supposedly they have an understanding, that they're not going to get attached to just having fun, whatever the case may be. But for somebody who's just having fun, again, he commits the same crime as Johan in the 1973 version. They updated it, so this house has gone on Airbnb. There's a new family living there, but when they go on vacation, they rent it out. And so he thought it was a good idea. Jonathan thought it was a good idea. Let's go and stay. We can be reminded and even see how they've changed the place. And they don't really find it super cute. Like, like, oh, I wouldn't have done that, or what's this? And they're kind of picking it apart and criticizing it. And then they help themselves to some wine. And you know what that leads to. And so they're back in their marital bed, sort of, and then you see that for some reason the chemistry isn't necessarily there. Although I will say though, perhaps because of his background or during their marriage. And when they had that big blow up, she threw in his face that he had hang-ups when it came to intimacy and even just sexy talk. Like, it was something that, because again, people forget that other religions and other cultures, just operate different. And it's been known, and again, don't quote me, I'm just going based on, knowledge that I've seen on TV. So if I do make a mistake, forgive me. But from what I have an understanding, specifically like Hasidic Jews, there's an issue with intimacy. Intimacy is more for just the reproduction of children, and it's not really for pleasure. So any kind of bodily fluids, they're quick to clean themselves. Also, I think women, when they're menstruating, they can't sleep alongside their husbands. So all of that, I think, kind of factored into this relationship, that even though he had put that aside, it's hard when, since birth, this has been a part of who you are, and it makes the person as they are, how they think and process information, and how they relate to their partners. So that was his flaw. And then she already has her own baggage, which she admits in this episode, this last final episode, that her mother, which we don't meet or see, but she talks about her, and you can kind of see why there was issues in their marriage too, because her mother, who was already on her third or fourth marriage, tells her, because here she is excited about marrying Jonathan. This is before the issues that they had and years of marriage and children. They were just, he had just popped the question, and she tells her mother, excited. And her mother tells her, like, well, that's great for you, and I think he's great and everything, but, I don't see that lasting, because you don't have that gene, to be faithful and loyal to anybody. You don't have that marriage gene. And your father didn't have it, I didn't have it, so why would you think you have it? And so I guess it's a rebellious act. And she had already been picking like losers in the past. We hear this in their fights, their previous fights. And that every time that she found herself in the dumps, she kind of convinced herself, well, this is for my betterment. And perhaps, and maybe marrying Jonathan, she thought she was doing a service to herself. I'm not going to go with the typical guy that I like that's a mess. And I'm going to get myself with this person who's reserved and has it all together. But then realize that she didn't like that either. So there's some inner workings there that she needs to figure out for herself. So the best thing I think they did was get a divorce. But now we find out like why there were so many issues in that marriage. And so maybe in talking about their past and their past trauma, it kind of put a damper in their sexy time. And they need a break from each other. So he has like an issue, and remember, he has asthma. I don't know if I mentioned that in my previous videos, but he suffers from asthma, but he likes the cigarette. He loves, like, he finds like release in the nicotine, knowing that he needs a pump every 3 seconds, but whatever. But I don't think he finds a cigarette. He just needed a break in that house. And we discover that Jonathan's moved on, right? Like I said, he's the one that's married, not her. She's not married in this version. So Marianne, who would be the Marianne in this case, or Johan, because Mira is doing the Johan version in the 2021 version, doesn't remarry. Like, they are proudly single. But he isn't. He started dating somebody soon after their divorce, and I guess he really just liked hooking up with her. But in hooking up with her, she got pregnant. And so now, I guess, and he admits. So how he gets to this, okay, before he gets to that, he gets an incoming call when he takes a break from Mira. He's in the bathroom, and you see that he's talking to a baby. And in episode 4, he had mentioned something about like being like selective co-parent, which is something people do, so that they have no attachment, but they provide their specimens so they can reproduce and have children, but there's no attachment between the adults. And that's what we think that's happening here. But then we realize that no, he's in a committed relationship, because the woman is inquisitive, like, where are you? Are you still at your mother's? And he's talking about the funeral, like as if he's still staying in the house with his mother. And he's like, oh no, I'm going to go back home tomorrow. And he's really not there. He's there with his ex. in his former house, and she does not know that. So he closes the conversation and then finds Mira in the attic. And the attic was a big source of issues too. She wanted the attic for whatever reason. And then we see that whatever family moved in did expand the attic like she had always perhaps even envisioned. And it's really pretty up there. And see, this is the difference here because there's no attic in the 1973 version. They just go to a cottage, that cottage I mentioned. And so that's the separation here and the differences between both miniseries. So I think they find it less stuffy and less reminiscent of their problems. And they have a moment of honesty. He talks about the woman that he's currently married to and lying to. And he's like, I didn't really want to marry her, but I wanted my child. And I wanted to give a sibling to my child that I share with you. Kind of cruel. And he kind of also admits that he's like, well, I just don't feel that I will find love again. And I just didn't want to wait. So that's unfortunate for that woman who thinks that he is in love with her. But so we don't know if we'll see another downward spiral with that coupling. But nonetheless, he still has a thing for Mira. They have hot, passionate sex in that attic/room. And then we have the same scenario play out from the 1973 version where one of them, which he's playing the female lead, Jonathan, by Oscar Isaac, he wakes up in the middle, soon after they are together intimately, and he has a nightmare talking about, some accident or what, and I think it freaks him out. And somehow Mira is able to kind of settle his nerves, and they, just kind of comfortably stay there and fall asleep. And the scene cuts. They pick up. You hear the ringing of the bell. They're done for they wrap. They put on their robes, and you can see that it's like very, because they're, both very vulnerable. They're semi-naked or naked. And then you see how they kind of drift off, and it looks like a play. It literally feels like a play. And they both go into their green rooms, and that's where it ends. I think it was a really great miniseries. I think it's definitely one to watch, and especially back to back. I didn't see it when it originally aired in September, but I'm glad I waited till now because I could see it all together. And it was really great. It was a great story. I think it was shot beautifully, and and especially during such a tough time like COVID. But it was I recommended it. It's streaming currently now on Hbomax. I'm gonna be reviewing Ozark next because I just fell in love with season 4, but I really want to take my time with it. But I will be back with Ozark season 4 recap. And this is the first part. There's only 7 episodes, so stay tuned for that. If you like what you see, give us a like, leave us a comment down below, hit the subscription button and the notification button so you can be alerted of my next review. And until next time, y'all, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. The score is beautiful too, by the way. You gotta watch it. Hbomax. And great Latino representation. Oscar, bravo. Also, I'll be reviewing The Eyes of Tammy Faye. That was really great with Jessica Chastain. So stay tuned for that too. All right, y'all. Till next time. XOXO. Nerdy Girl.